what we refer to as the Cold War, meaning that they try to block each other's objectives, but they're not actually fighting. And the United States had come up with a new policy to stop the Soviet Union called containment. And the idea was to protect the world from communism spreading from one nation to the next. There's a theory that will develop later on, and I'll go ahead and mention this term now, what was called the domino theory. The idea that if one country fell under the control of communism, then it would be like a series of dominoes, and all countries would eventually fall to communism because it would spread that rapidly. You see in the little cartoon here, Uncle Sam there at the bottom, and you have the Russian bear at the top, and they're trying to spread communism, the Soviet influence throughout the world, and the United States seeks to stop that. They want to contain communism. There are two key elements at the beginning of the containment policy, and the first one is something we call the Truman Doctrine. Okay? The Truman Doctrine, and anytime you have the word doctrine, you're just talking about a way of doing things. The Truman Doctrine is predicated upon the idea that the United States is willing to commit money and resources anywhere in the world to fight the threat of communism. One of the things that you see here is President Harry Truman making a speech right before the crises in Greece and Turkey had erupted. And he had made it a point to tell the United States Congress and the American people that we need to pitch in and help out. We need to provide money, military supplies, and aid to prevent the spread of communism. And you see right here with this particular headline, Harry Truman asked Congress for money to authorize spending money to help these two countries. Congress believed that it had the authority to not only do so, but it had kind of a duty to help out. And so people were convinced that Harry Truman was right and that we must go anywhere to fight the threat of communism. Now, that's going to bring in some testing from the Soviet Union. They see that the United States is committed to fighting Soviet aggression, so they want to see just how much the United States is willing to do in terms of fighting that threat of communism. So that's one of the pieces of the containment policy, the idea that we'll go anywhere to stop the threat of communism. Now, the second piece is something way more tangible and has a positive impact on the world in a number of capacities. It's something called the Marshall Plan. Remember, one of the things we talked about in general is that communism, people tend to want to turn to communism when they feel like they are left without any realistic options. When they are poor and they have nothing, anything sounds like a good idea. And in particular, to stop the spread of communism, the United States decided to use its massive economic wealth and resources to help Europe rebuild. The idea is that if we provide funding to European nations, they won't want to turn to communism. And you see, war-torn Europe, there are many cities, especially in Germany, that are bombed out like this, and they need quite a bit of rebuilding. But they need resources to do this as well, so that's where the United States is going to step in. You see the countries here in green, they are going to get grants and loans from the United States to help rebuild after the war is over. And you can see some countries like Spain, they weren't involved in World War II, so they don't need really anything, and they don't want to kind of become beholden to the United States. You see that the larger the bar graph, the more money that they took. The United States also offered the Marshall Plan to Eastern European nations. However, Eastern European nations and the Soviet Union didn't want to take this money because, one, the Soviet Union understood that if the United States is loaning them money or giving them money to rebuild, it's almost an admission of weakness, and they don't want to give the United States the upper hand in world affairs. Also, many of the communists believed this was just a capitalist ploy, a way to make money off of European nations in World War II. And that's a legitimate accusation, but here's the thing, though. The United States, even though they didn't require Western European nations to buy American goods, the reality was that the United States was the only country who could really give them what they needed in terms of supplies for rebuilding, because everybody else didn't have the quality and quantity of products from everything from steel, concrete, food sources, anything that a person might want or anything that would be needed to rebuild their countries after the war. The United States not only had the money, but the resources to get that material to them. The Soviet Union, because they wouldn't take it, they wouldn't let the communist nations under their influence take that money either. The United States is going to benefit from this because American businesses now have customers over in Europe. And most of that money came in the form of grants, but you can see that different countries are going to borrow heavily. Over a 3.5 year time period, the United States is going to push more than $12 billion into the European economy. And it really does wonders not only for saving Europe, but building a lot of goodwill towards the United States. The Marshall Plan is undoubtedly a success in helping the United States in the bigger picture in the Cold War against the Soviet Union. Also, in terms of money and economy, after World War II, you're going to see a huge surge in capitalism and the growth of money in general. One of the things that the United States and the international community do is set up something called the International Monetary Fund. It's a place that holds a large amount of reserve currencies, and it's kind of like a marketplace for the exchange of goods and services, particularly currency. The United States gets this up and running because it provides a stable place for currencies to be exchanged. And the United States dollar becomes the reserve currency in the world. So the IMF, which is still in operation today, helps make sure that transfers of money and services go pretty smoothly and quickly. In days in the past, the situation like the exchange of currencies and changing from one currency to the next to make international purchases could go much more slowly, and the exchange rate could change at particular times. So not only that, but the United States puts into place a fixed standard for gold. You see right here what they do is $35 for 1 ounce of gold is what the United States would redeem. Back then, you could still exchange money for gold. If you look on old paper currency in the United States, you'll see that in some places there are silver certificates or gold certificates where you could redeem that money at a bank for gold. You could also trade in gold and get those cash certificates back. So capitalism is on the rise. There's a lot of international business happening. But the Soviet Union and communist countries want none of that. The world effectively is divided into two camps, all right? And so you had, the title of this chapter is The Bipolar World. And what we mean is that there are two distinct groups. You have the United States and the democratic nations, the democracies who use capitalism, and you have the Soviet Union and the communist countries that they influence. Those are the two big groups, and it's kind of like you've got to be in somebody's corner. Despite many nations trying their best not to get involved or to stay out of the Cold War, the United States and Soviet Union are going to work really hard to put them in a position where they have to pick a side. Also, the United States and the Soviet Union are working on revitalizing Germany. Unfortunately, no, they're never able to quite agree about what to do. They had differing visions for what Germany was going to be like. The United States, Great Britain, and France wanted Germany to become a whole nation again, a democratic nation, a peaceful nation, and they wanted to see Germany restored to German rule. Well, that was not what the Soviet Union had envisioned. They used their sector of Germany to loot entirely. They disassembled factories and machines and took the valuable equipment and all the capital out of Eastern Germany and took it back to the Soviet Union because they figured that all the destruction that the Germans had caused in World War II, that this was a form of repayment. And so Germany, there's going to be differing perspectives. And what's going to happen is the Soviet Union and the Allies are going to form two different Germanys. East Germany is entirely the Soviet Union's sector. And you see inside of it the whole city of Berlin. They're going to divide that up also. West Germany becomes its own nation, free and democratic. It's the combined three sectors of the British, the French, and the Americans. And so West Germany is going to be reestablished as its own independent nation, and East Germany will be a communist government. And technically it's ruled by Germans, but they're under the heavy influence of the Soviet Union. The city of Berlin is divided into half as well, and it remained entirely within East Germany. So that's going to cause a bit of a problem too. So Germany's divided into East and West, and you have a real problem here Because of all the crises that were going on, the United States started to realize too that they couldn't just rely on nuclear weapons to deter people. They still needed to build up their conventional armed forces. They needed infantry, they needed artillery, they needed tanks, airplanes. And so they have to pay attention to that as well. Plus, they also realized at some point the Soviet Union would develop nuclear weapons and their advantage would disappear.